Good evening. Welcome to the University of South Australia. My name's Nigel Ralph. I'm Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Vice President of the university, and it's my great pleasure to be your host this evening. And I welcome you here tonight on behalf of the university, but also on behalf of the Jean Monnet Centre of Excellence and the Jean Monnet Network here at the university, the Pulch Prime Ministerial Centre and the European Union Delegation to Australia. And as is our custom, I'd just like to acknowledge that we are meeting this evening on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people and pay respect to their elders past and present. So this evening we have a uniquely large number of VIPs. Usually at this point in a speech I acknowledge all the VIPs, but if I did that this evening we probably wouldn't get anything else in. So I hope you'll forgive me if I don't acknowledge everybody by name. But we have a very large group of ambassadors or high commissioners this evening. My useless fact of the evening is that there's no collective noun for ambassadors. Did you know that? I tried to find one that's, like shoal of fish or what is it, a mob of kangaroos, I think they say, that kind of thing. So I thought there must be one, so I tried to find it, but there's no collective noun. So I'll leave you to think one up. You can think of one before the end of the evening. And tonight we have, like I say, a very large number of 14 ambassadors, one High Commissioner and one Deputy Head of Mission. So I'll just read out the countries represented here, and again, forgive me if I get anything wrong. I was born in Britain, so we're not too hot on European matters, as you know. Austria, Belgium, Croatia, Cyprus, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, Slovenia, Romania, and of course, Dr. Michael Pulch, the Ambassador of the European Union himself. I'd also like to acknowledge Professor Richard Pomfret, the Jean Monnet Chair from the University of Adelaide, a close friend and collaborator of ours, and a warm welcome to all of you who've braved the heat to be here with us today. I just wanted to say, by way of introduction, that the European Union, and Europe generally, is of paramount strategic importance to this university, as it is to most Australian universities. We talk a lot about Asia. China is very much in our thoughts at the moment with coal exports and problems around all that kind of thing. But if you look as a university at things that really matter to us, if you look at the critical mass of really high quality research and educational collaborations in the world, really they're all in Europe. I did a count this afternoon of where we have them. So we at the moment have 3,026 individual research collaborations with European EU-based institutions, and those are divided amongst over 100 actually different universities across the EU. We, in the last 2 years, have had 2,469 joint publications with EU-based researchers in top journals. We've got 28 formal MOUs with EU institutions, and we've got, as I say, about 100 other sorts of less formal collaborations, and we've got 33 student exchange agreements with EU institutions. So that's just us. So you can imagine, you look at that across the whole university sector in Australia, it's huge. And for this reason, the University of South Australia was very keen to maintain very strongly a strategic platform for collaboration in the EU and for understanding of big challenges of mutual interest. So when the old EU Centre programme ended, we used to have an EU Centre, which had been very successful. We applied and we were successful in winning some more funding for new initiatives in this area. So first of all, we won a new Public Diplomacy and Research Jean Monnet Centre under a prestigious Erasmus Plus grant, which we were delighted to receive. And under the leadership of Executive Director Professor Anthony Elliott, the centre began operating on 1st of September last year, focusing on 3 main themes, which I think you'll agree are really important. Industry 4.0, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, autonomous machines and big data, developments in the creative industries, including design of business models and skills for digital markets, and changing patterns of migration and mobility and their impact on social identities. And secondly, so we got not 1 but 2, we also won a Jean Monnet network. also under an Erasmus Plus grant, and that brings together a consortium of universities in Australia, in Germany, Denmark, Estonia, New Zealand and Japan to examine the impact of driverless vehicles on society, again a very important issue of our day. Running across the centre and the network activities is an overarching emphasis on understanding Australia's relationship with the EU. So for this reason, when Ambassador Pulch flagged to us last year that he was keen to bring the cohort of ambassadors, collective noun, I've invented one, cohort of ambassadors to Adelaide, we were keen to hold this kind of event where we could look at Australia-EU issues. So tonight, the format is, there'll be an introduction from Ambassador Porsche in a moment, and then a series of short presentations by 4 of the heads of mission here on different issues, on cultural cooperation, on commercial links with Australia, on European communities in Australia, and on education and research cooperative opportunities with Australia. And then there'll be an interview by Professor Elliott of Dr. Pulch and the 4 presenting ambassadors, and then an audience Q&A, and we'd love to hear from the other heads of mission during that period. Just before we commence the real proceedings and I shut up, I'd just like to acknowledge the work of my colleagues in both the Jean Monnet Centre and also the Bob Hawke Prime Ministerial Centre in organising this evening. These things don't just happen. There's always people behind the scenes making them happen, so we're very grateful to them. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce the EU Ambassador to Australia, Dr. Michael Porsche.
Thank you, Nigel, for the nice introduction, and good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be back. I was giving the Europe lecture here in October, and I like this place so much that we promised to come back with reinforcement, and that has happened here. I would also like to thank everyone in this room for your interest. I know that this discussion takes place at the time of the Fringe Festival. I was looking at tonight's program. It said Best of British Comedy and a Flying Circus. So there's tough competition, and we won't even talk about Brexit tonight. So what we're trying today is a kind of a new format. We will have 4 of my colleagues who will present and cover different aspects of EU-Australia relations from a member state perspective. This visit here to this university is part of a visit to the state of South Australia. We do this as a group of European ambassadors. We had already discussions today with Trade Minister Simon Birmingham and the spokesperson for the Labour Party on Foreign Policy, Penny Wong. Tomorrow we'll see the Premier of South Australia, Stephen Marshall, and we'll also have lunch with the Governor, and in between visit companies and organizations and talk about opportunities for us to engage more with this beautiful part of Australia. Now, the idea to have sort of a group debate today was coming from here, from Anthony and Nigel, and we took this up and had a call for volunteers on a first-come, first-served basis. So they will talk about commerce, innovation, research, communities, and culture. So what I will do is just give an opening remarks about the underlying principle of the European project, creating a stable, peaceful, and prosperous continent for European people. Now let me start by something that happened last year. 3 months ago, we commemorated the 100 years anniversary of the armistice of the First World War, and that was a moment to remind ourselves that Australians sacrificed their lives on European battlefields. As a result of this war, about 1/3 of our current member states gained or regained their independence. But many of them lost their independence again, entirely or partially, as a result of another devastating war and the following period of Cold War in Europe. Why am I saying this? I'm looking at the panel that we will have today, And as I said, the selection of our colleagues was a bit arbitrary because it was on a first-come, first-served basis, but in some ways they also represent the various stages of the transformation of the European Union over time. Now, normally in a presentation like this, I'll talk about the economic stages of the European Union, from a customs union to a single market and a currency union, and how we developed economically. Today I would like to focus on the political dimension on the EU, because at the root of it, the EU was always a peace project. No, so here we go. We will have Germany, represents the founding members, when the EU started with only 6 countries. One of the clear objectives at the time was to overcome the century-old French-German hostility, or German-French, however you like it. German unification was only possible politically within the context of a European framework, and that is why Europe was so important for this. We have Austria. Now, Austria is a member of an enlargement group in the mid-1990s, together with Finland and Sweden. These were countries that for constitutional, historical, or geopolitical reasons could not join the European defense alliances earlier, in particular NATO. But 6 years following the fall of the Berlin Wall, they used the opening of the continent to join the European Union. And it was interesting, at that time, Russia did not oppose that, because they did not understand the security dimension of the European Union. By the way, there was also the first time that we had a direct border with Russia as a result of that. In between these 2 steps, 2 other groups joined. One of that group is very, very well known to Australians. In 1973, parts of the EFTA group, UK, Ireland, and Denmark, became members of the European Union. And then another group of countries a few years later, at different times, Greece, Spain, and Portugal, that had a different background of joining. They did overcome autocratic military-based regimes, and they joined the European Union largely to secure and protect their new democracies. So there was a different angle for them to join at the time. Cyprus will also present today. It's a country that was part of a group of 10, mainly Central and Eastern European countries that went through an unprecedented transformation process. That transformation process was launched following the changes in Europe and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and it covered all aspects and all dimensions of society. The political orientation, they went from communism to democracies, the economic one, from state-run economies to market-oriented liberal economies, and from a closed to an open society. And this transformation was one of the most profound in recent history and changed forever the face of Europe. Bulgaria and Romania, this semester holding presidency in Europe, followed soon after. And Croatia will also present. It's the latest member state that became independent like Slovenia as a result of the disintegration of Yugoslavia. But the EU membership showed a peaceful objective for all. And some parts of the country embraced this goal early on and were thus able to join already. And some of them, including Serbia, now are candidates for future membership. So peace and stability were always key factors for the European project. And they're also a pillar of the EU-Australia relationship, which is based on a like-minded partnership. And we both support a multilateral rules-based order, which were reminded in our discussions with the Australian counterparts today. Now, looking at the European history, as I sort of explained to you in a few minutes, we were able to overcome several difficult and sensitive problems in our internal relations as a result of that union. Reconciliation of Germany and France and with neighboring countries, the separation of the continent through an Iron Curtain, the Northern Ireland troubles, and the Good Friday Agreement that solved it, and the legacy of the Balkan War and the implosion of Yugoslavia. And in fact, only a few weeks ago, an important agreement was found to name one of these countries, the Republic of North Macedonia. Now, to have achieved this was one of the key reasons why the European Union received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2012. And very often we forget that, but it's one of the few organizations that actually achieved that received that prize. So my conclusion here is, I think we need to understand the political dimension of the European Union to know how it works. And often that is not fully appreciated in my view, and it is often reduced too much to an economic dimension only, an economic undertaking. But you have to understand the political background, because otherwise it's difficult to comprehend why the so-called backstop to prevent a hard border in Ireland is so crucial in our Brexit negotiations. Our lessons learned in Europe is there is no prosperity without stability and peace. And on that happy note, I will leave the stage for my colleagues to talk about the topics that they've chosen. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Pulch, and thank you for bringing all your reinforcements tonight. We're very much looking forward to hearing from the ambassadors this evening. My name's Anthony Elliott. I'm Executive Director of the Hawke EU Jean Monnet Centre, and as Deputy Vice-Chancellor Nigel Rolfe indicated, I'm going to be introducing speakers tonight. It's really less a formal interview, we're just a few questions, and please start getting ready for your questions later on when we move to the Q&A. So, the first speaker this evening, it is my pleasure to introduce His Excellency Bernhard Zimberg, who is the Austrian Ambassador to Australia, who took up his post in 2016. Prior to his appointment as the Austrian Ambassador to Australia, Ambassador Zimberg had served as the Head of Department for Asia, Australia, New Zealand and Pacific for the Federal Ministry of Europe and International Affairs, and now he's going to speak to us about EU-Australia cooperation on culture. Welcome.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much that you came in such large numbers, and congratulations to Professor Elliott and his Hawke EU Centre, Jean Monnet EU European Centre. You seem to have very comfortably survived all the European budgetary cuts. Congratulations for that. Ladies and gentlemen, needless to say that culture is extremely important to Europe. It is important for our identity, it is important for our cohesion as a continent, for social cohesion, but also it is increasingly acknowledged that culture accounts for employment and economic growth. So it is very astonishing that you find very little reference in the European treaties on culture. And if you look at the treaties of Rome, it was all about trade and economics. It was all about coal and steel and about nuclear activities in Euratom. No mention about culture. It is only in 1995 that the Treaty of Maastricht, the Union Treaty, the first time mentioned culture. And I may quote, it is the European Union shall respect its rich cultural and linguistic diversity and shall ensure that Europe's cultural heritage is safeguarded and enhanced. That is it, 1995, the first mention of culture. Parallel to that, there is also the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, and its Article 167 quote, the Union shall contribute to the flowering of the cultures of the member states while respecting their national and regional diversity and at the same time bringing the common cultural heritage to the fore. So this is slightly more specific. At the same time, the understanding was formulated with individual EU member states responsible for their own cultural sector policies, the common cultural policy of the European Union does not aim at any harmonization of the cultural identities of the member states, but on the contrary, at the conservation of their diversity. So these are the specifications upon which a so-called common cultural policy is based upon. And it is very interesting, how did the first European cultural activities emerge? It came actually from a Greek cultural minister in 1983, Melina Mercouri, who realized very shortly after the accession of Greece in 1981 that culture is so important, something has to happen. She was not a European commissar, but she was a national minister for culture. And so she invented the concept of the European cultural capital. And this concept became very popular right from the start. In 1985, the first such capital was Athens. And in the process, there were a lot of applicants, a lot of competition happening. And so the European Union, or then the European Community, decided to accept any suitable candidate. And then you had years where there were several cultural capitals being installed. And in the year 2000, there were even 9 such capitals all around Europe, including European countries which were not members of the European Union at the time. And so this was a very important concept in order to do something also with the treaties. And it was in 1995 that the Treaty of Maastricht adopted the concept of a common cultural policy. Then last year was the first year of a European Year of Cultural Heritage. This was limited to the year 2018 and was very successful, but the question then arose, what else? What should follow up? And it was in May of last year that the European institutions agreed on a new European agenda for culture. This is a very new thing, but this is the first time that there is a continuous cultural concept embedded in the European contractual or legal system. And if we look at Australia, how does the common cultural policy reflect here? Because culture is carried out by the member states in a great variety. Most of our member states have cultural institutes and other cultural entities which are permanent structures in order to show a national cultural footprint here in the country. But what is very important and shows in a nutshell how the cultural policy works is the Multicultural Festival every year in Canberra, which is organized and logistically set up by the European Embassy in Canberra, but you don't have people making dances, etc., but all the rest is carried out by the member states. But the European Embassy in Canberra has invented a tool in order to make everybody look out for the various member countries, and that is the European passport. So this passport was primarily meant for children and young people. Each country is represented, and you get a stamp when you go to the various national booths, and then you go back to the European stand and get a present. But it turned out that adults are really hooked to this concept, and it is mainly adult people who are running from booth to booth in order to collect the stamp, and sometimes they pretend to do it for their grandchildren and so on. So this was very successful. And another tool are the film festivals, which are almost in all major cities here in the country. So now I think I have a bit I have exceeded my time limit. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to answer your questions.
Thank you, Ambassador Zimberg. The next speaker tonight is the German ambassador to Australia, Dr. Anna Prinz, who took up her post in 2016. Before coming to Australia, she served as the Deputy Ambassador to Tokyo and as Ambassador to Slovenia. And she's now going to talk to us about EU commercial relations with Australia. Her Excellency, Dr. Anna Prince.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to a festival town which embraces talent and such a culture, diverse culture, where we as Europeans contribute. We have, from Germany, we have 4 different groups opening the festival also tomorrow with Komische Oper, with Barry Kosky, an Australian. So for the first time, Komische Oper is really funny. We are glad about that. Well, anyway, we hear a lot about problems. Brexit, we hear about coal exports. We don't need that much in the future. We know about structural change here in Adelaide, you know. So how can the Australian-European relationship add and help? And let me start with a quote of a comic drawer who I like a lot. It's Charles M. Schulz, who said, because Germans are always worried, that's our energy. Don't worry about the world coming to an end today. It's already tomorrow in Australia. So for me, it's difficult because we have all the EU ambassadors here. And they all, of course, contribute to a single European market. This means I can't talk about the German economy without talking about all the others. We are 500 million. And not only 500 million producing together, there are no borders, students are moving, our economy is moving. Already 10 years ago, we had 1,200 companies importing, for example, to Germany, 600 dealing with neighbor countries, and now it's even more, which means if we look at statistics, I will talk about it in a moment, we have to look at it in a different way. Sometimes companies are global players, so where is their financial seat? Where is this accounted for? How does the intellectual property goes into that? Or the cooperation in research, where at least 3-4 countries in Europe cooperate on a result. And we have to look at the small companies, the ones who deliver to make a good project. In car industry, it's 2/3 coming from other countries and it's assembled somewhere. And that's our big advantage with Industry 4.0, where we can have high labor cost, but still export, because we have this intellectual cooperation, which is also our strength in cooperating with Australia. Well, let me see. If I look at figures, at the moment, and I think we should concentrate on the future, on the potential. Australia being close to the Asian markets, Australia being the core country to export later hydrogen or produce it at very low cost, to lead us into an economy where we have no cost energy, not low cost, no cost energy, and can reduce the CO2 burden of this world and maybe help us to save the planet. This is Australia, and we need to go fast and go forward to implement that. Anyway, right now, if you look at the figures, Europe comes second after China in two-way trade. So that accounts for 30.2%. EU-Australia's biggest source of import by value is 19%. It's the biggest source, so we are great. Most importantly, the EU is Australia's biggest supplier of services imports, which means you still need our manufacturing know-how to build up your own industry. And that's where we really are strong and where we have to cooperate more. Will this change with Brexit? A question that's in the room. Well, it's predicted in general that trade will still grow by 4% over the next 5 years with Europe, so we are growing strong. Germany, for example, has been the 10th strongest trade partner of Australia, Britain the 7th. What do these figures really tell us? I go back to the origin. Look at a company like Shell. So for example, the Netherlands, they don't show in these statistics, but of course they are a very big investor for Australia. But then Shell is a global company. Right now is then Shell Britain, Shell America, or maybe Shell The Hague, the one who does it? I would pose this question differently, because I've just been to the Sonnen company. Sonnen is a German company, new investor in Adelaide. They assemble batteries for households to have an independent grid. And plus, they monitor the grid so that you don't have problems with electricity. So I've just read, they were bought by Shell. What does this mean? Does this mean Shell doesn't want them to grow? Or does this mean this is the future? And I can assure you, talking to them, this is the future. So you are here tapping to a growth market. And I've been to Perth last week, and I brought along also industry researchers, etc. So you can see there is lots of investment also from the Netherlands, from Norway, fertilizers, hydrogen storage in ammonia, agriculture production combined with hydrogen in the future, lots of potential. And we will see what's happening. But if you look at, for example, all the materials we need for our mobility, you can see in the statistics by, I can quote it, we are here at a university, if I find it, a think tank, I will tell you in a moment, who just looks at the Chinese involvement already in that area, and it's always above 90% in each sector, which means in the long run, if we don't diversify, we might end up in a situation, if resources are scarce, or if production is concentrated, where we do have monopolistic structures. That's why we have to come and invest to assure diversity, which will then also lead to new innovation and to a better future. That's nothing against the Chinese investment. I looked at one company where they produce according to Australian standards, safety, health, labor, and that's what we need. If this is assured, it's investment to the future. And we should do the same cooperatively and maybe have some more risk capital in that. If you look at what is exported to Europe, you see immediately where the problem is. 2017, about 4 billion went into coal exported to Europe. We are shutting down our coal plants and we don't want to burn coal, so this will be replaced because the percentage of renewables in Germany is going up, in Europe is going up. Gold, 3 billion. Oil seeds and oleaginous fruits. You know, I'm German. By the way, my mother's name is Adelaide. That's why I love to come here. I always feel home. So these fruits, their exports have doubled. You can see the potential for agricultural production. It's really huge. A little bit in wine, a little bit in meat. Okay, we are good at that too. And there are other markets. It seems right now that everybody in the world is drinking more wine, so you have the Asian markets here. I hope it won't be a problem for the free trade agreement, because our future doesn't lie in wine. It's just a very small percentage. Our future is in cooperating in services and in industries which will lead us into the future and which will help Australia to feed also the Asian neighbors, who will grow by 100,000 a day in the years to come. That's the prognosis we have. And we will see completely different structures. What else? What will change in the future? I have to shorten it a bit because I like to speak. I think if you look at some of the industries here around South Australia, space industry, for example, you had the space conference with your famous astronaut, a tradition in Australia, in Adelaide, which has been built up over a long time. The following one was in Europe. You will now have more cooperation in that following these conferences, because space is the future. Communication, Industry 4.0, it depends on reliable satellites, and a lot has to be done in that field. and you have a unique position in the southern hemisphere on that. So this is European-Australian cooperation for the future, in addition to renewable energy, where you have twice the intensity of the sun, twice the intensity of wind, and all the logistics already in place, where maybe blue LNG will start and green hydrogen follow. I would say, if you look at all the partners from the European Union here, we are all here and we are cooperating in Europe on research and on production. And I have seen a lot of startups developing in Europe. And we are now trying to cooperate with Tonsley, for example, and they are open for all our cooperation for small startups, which then easily grow fast and big. You see this internationally, how much this is changing, because the smaller ones seem to be very flexible compared to big ones. They have smaller circles. One last thing I wanted to say, where it's a good example that Europe can manage with crisis. Don't believe all the newspaper talks about the crisis of Europe. I don't believe it, because I've worked on European enlargement earlier, and I know the growth rates in the new member states are tremendous. The new technology is coming from there. And I also know the people, they want to have free movement. They want their children to study wherever they like and to cooperate. And they profit a lot from regional cooperation and regional funding. So this will go on. You will see it in the May election. The acceptance rate of Europe is big. And what else do we need to know? I think we are competing internationally. Europe is competing with China already. We also depend on it. But together with Australia, we can influence to keep our standards, to have an environment which is livable, to get into new technologies which solve the problems. And I think here in Australia, you are fast. We've just seen it also in the health sector. You're faster than we are. And the factories I've visited were built up faster than we could do it. So you are, in a way, unique, because you have the cultural heritage of Europe, but also the Asian immigration influence and the vision of a migration country, an immigration country, where you just have to have the courage to do something new, and you do it fast and in a cooperative way. So I think we are really good partners. And also the Chinese influence, which is talked about so much. If we do this together, according to standards, it can be helpful to move things forward. And should we be faster together? Let me finish. Don't worry about the world coming to an end. It's already tomorrow in Australia.
Thank you, Ambassador Prince. Our next speaker tonight is the Croatian ambassador to Australia, Her Excellency Mrs. Betty Pavlic. And when she took up her appointment in 2018, prior to that, she had been a foreign policy advisor to the Speaker of Parliament in the Republic of Croatia. She's going to speak to us now about European communities in Australia, especially in South Australia. Her Excellency Betty Pavlic, welcome.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to be here tonight with my European colleagues to discuss the importance of the EU-Australia relationship. At the outset, I'd like to thank the Hawke EU Jean Monnet Centre of Excellence for partnering with us to make this event possible tonight. As the representative of the EU's newest member state, I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to talk to you about the importance, the relevance of European communities in the context of our relationship with Australia. Although I think I don't need to say much about the relationship the important relationship that Australia, or that the United Kingdom has had with Australia, or the footprint that it's left here. I think what many don't know is about the emigres from a majority of the EU member states and how important they have been to Australia as you know it today, dating back to, I think, the 19th century when the first European settlers started coming here. So according to official statistics, and we always sort of look at official statistics when it comes to our communities abroad a little skeptically, because our numbers tend to be a little higher than the official statistics do, and I know my Cypriot colleague here is nodding her head because we have similar issues. More than 15 million Australians claim European heritage, with the largest communities hailing from Italy, Ireland, and Germany. In South Australia, the top 10 European nations represented by virtue of their heritage, and I'll just quickly run through. Ireland, Germany, again, number 2, whose clubs and wines and expertise in business are well known to everybody, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about Germany because you all know how great they are and how influential they are here. Italy, Greece, the Netherlands, Poland. Croatia comes in at number 7 of the European communities, believe it or not. France, Malta, and Hungary, rounding out the top 10. So members of these European communities found strength in their heritage. As strangers in a new land, very, very, very far away from Europe, they came together as a means of coping with their new lives and in search of belonging. They took comfort in their traditions, their language, their faith, their food, skills, music, dance, sport, and everything that they were forced to leave behind. And today, generations after setting foot on Australian soil, the traditions of the European communities that I've just mentioned, as well as others, apart from the top 10, continue to flourish across this country, but particularly in South Australia. South Australians of Italian heritage, for instance, leaders in the fields of winemaking, olive oil production, food and wine importing, distribution, cheese making, pasta manufacturing. I could go on and on. They also increasingly hold prominent positions in public life at the local, state, and federal level. During my first visit to Adelaide in November last year, the Speaker of the South Australian House of Assembly, Vincent Tarzia, shared with me the importance that his heritage has played throughout his life and the pride that he and his community have felt following his election, not only as the youngest speaker ever to serve here, but as the first of Italian heritage to be elected to that office. And it's that sense of belonging and pride that are the two fundamental elements in celebrating heritage and in what our communities here celebrate. This is something that I can personally attest to as a Croatian who spent most of her life in Canada prior to returning to my homeland more than a decade ago. Croatians, and I apologize to my colleagues because I'm going to focus a little bit on Croatians. They came to Australia in search of a better life as early as the 1900s, with the biggest wave taking place from the 1950s to the mid-1980s as Croatians fled communism. Since their arrival, they've contributed to life in Australia as artists, entrepreneurs, engineers, academics, farmers, fishermen, athletes. I could go on and on. But they've also maintained a very close bond with their homeland. That bond became ever stronger following Croatia's independence in 1991 and the Homeland War. The Croatian community in Australia played a hugely important role through its moral, financial, and political assistance during what were some of the hardest times in Croatia's modern-day history. They've since then helped us to rebuild the country, helped us pursue our reforms, which, as my EU colleagues can attest to, are difficult as you're trying to join the EU and do all the things that we need to do to get into the clubs. But the greatest testament to the pride that the Australian Croatian community here felt for their independent homeland, I think, was and is this magnificent embassy and official residence that we have in Canberra, which the community built and bequeathed to us. It was their gift to the people of Croatia, and it was opened during the first official visit of Croatia's first president, Franjo Tuđman, in 1995. Today, we estimate, and I go back to the statistics, what the statistics say, we estimate that there are about 250,000 Croatians in Australia, or Australians of Croatian heritage. I know the official statistics say about 170,000. More than 10,000 of them reside here in Adelaide. And the surrounding communities, specifically I think Port Lincoln would be one that I'd like to highlight. The first known Croatian association in Australia, in all of Australia, was actually established here in Adelaide on Anzac Day in 1950. Community members gathered together in Hyde Park, founded the Croatian Club of Adelaide, which to this day continues to operate. That club, as well as a community council with a number of other clubs together, they actually continue to promote our culture, our language, our music, our food. I don't know if any of you have been, but there's an annual Festa wine and food festival, which I actually had the opportunity to go to at one of these amazing sports clubs that the community runs. So they're very engaged. I think it's hard not to miss them. But Croatians, like so many other European communities, and particularly the Italians and the Greeks, have also made valuable contributions to sport, and especially the development of soccer in Australia. For Croatians, that started actually in 1952 with the establishment of yet another first in Australia, here in Adelaide, the Adelaide Soccer Club. And that today continues on as the Adelaide Croatia Raiders. And so soccer's been an expression of our individual and collective identity in many ways. Croatia and Australia have both celebrated the successes of Australian Croatian soccer stars, Mark Bosnić, Ned Zelić, Toni Popović, Josip Skoko, Mark Viduka, as well as the success of Croatia's national team during the World Cup, but also the celebration of our World Cup friends and champions, France. Croatians around the globe and in Australia to this day recall the pride that they felt when Olympic gold medalist in weightlifting, Dean Lukin, a Croatian from Port Lincoln, carried Australia's flag into the closing ceremonies of the 1984 Olympic Games. South Australian Croatian entrepreneurs began leaving their mark in this state, starting as early as 1903, with the arrival of Jack Tomic, whose winemaking skills from the Adriatic have led to 3 generations of winemakers at Tomic Wines here in the Adelaide Hills. Or Davor Todorovic, who in 1950 rowed as in row the boat, across the Adriatic to Italy, and eventually made it here to Adelaide, where he founded the Todorovic Group that has, for more than 50 years, contributed to the development of landmark infrastructure, commercial and industrial projects, as well as commercial fishing. So strong was that bond of Davor's and his family that today they are responsible for the largest investments in Croatia coming out of Australia. I could go on and on and on about the success of our community, including tuna fishing in Port Lincoln, whose methods and technologies we now use in our thriving tuna market in Croatia. But I think I'm already getting over my time. For the government of the Republic of Croatia, our community in Australia, and particularly South Australia, is our most vital link to your country. My day today started at about 7 o'clock, meeting with my community council. It's the first thing we do. So important that during the state visit of our president last year, Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović, she actually, so that was 2017, we're already in 2019, she made 2 stops in South Australia, one here and one in Port Lincoln. And she's only the second head of state to ever visit Port Lincoln. The first was Queen Elizabeth II back in 1954. So that's how important the community is here. And although my remarks have primarily focused and highlighted the contributions of the Croatian community to life in South Australia and their continuing engagement in the homeland, I know for a fact that each and every one of my colleagues could share similar stories with you about their own communities in this state and across Australia. The successes of our communities and the bonds that they continue to enjoy with each and every one of our countries could have been very different today were it not for Australia's welcoming multicultural policies. We're grateful for the opportunities that Australia has afforded to all of our communities to maintain and celebrate their culture and their heritage. Your policies have contributed not only to greater understanding among populations, but they've laid the foundation for continued and expanding engagement with European Union member states in a whole array of fields, from arts, culture, academia, sport, and especially business. And we look forward to seeing that relationship flourish even more tomorrow than it has to date. Thank you.
Betty Pavlish, thank you very much. That was really fascinating. So, on to our final speaker before we move on to the Q&A tonight. The final speaker is the High Commissioner from Cyprus, Her Excellency Mrs. Martha Mavromaty, who took up her post in 2017. Martha Mavromaty has a long-established career in the Foreign Service with a number of postings including Syria, the United States and Brazil, and she's going to talk to us now about EU education and research opportunities in Australia.
I'm the shortest, so I have to. Good evening. I would also like to thank the University of South Australia for the invitation. And I would like also, first and foremost, to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are standing on, the elders, the present and the future. And it's been, as my colleague said, a very busy day, a very exciting day. We had meetings with members of the government, with the opposition. We went to the health center here. And of course, we have this very interesting panel tonight. Later, we have another event. And we are all looking forward to go and enjoy this multicultural event here in Adelaide, which is considered a very important event. And I would like to say that we might not be the Cypriot community in the top 10, as we were not in the top 10 to join the European Union, but we are indeed a very vibrant community here, like all the other communities, and we are also very proud of our community here in Adelaide. So, dear friends, I would elaborate today on the topic of education, research, and try to highlight this interesting aspect of Cyprus and my country's effort to become a regional higher educational hub. I will be talking, of course, having in mind the broader spectrum of relations between EU and Australia, as well as the enormous possibilities of cooperation between member states and South Australia. Let's start with some fun facts. In a population of just 800,000 people, Cyprus has more than 44,000 higher educational students, and almost half of them come from abroad. In fact, foreign students have been increasing with an annual 13.5% during the last decade. Higher education is currently contributing 2.5% to the GDP of the Republic of Cyprus, and naturally has become really important, not just because of the capital it generates, but also because of the crucial role it plays for the development of research, innovation, and the overall goal of building a smart economy. I have just highlighted a mere sum of the benefits and goals of Cyprus vis-à-vis higher education and research innovation. I believe that there is a lot of similarities with the other EU member states, as well as with Australia and South Australia. At EU-Australia level, there are on an average close to 30,000 publications involving EU and Australian authors every year. Australian researchers and organizations are actively involved in Horizon 2020, with close to 190 Australian researchers participating in Horizon 2020 related projects to date. In 2017, there were 73 projects involving Australian institutions, entailing 225 Australian students and academics going to Europe, and 195 students and academics coming to Australia. There were 6 Erasmus Mundus joint master degrees involving Australian universities, with 6 scholarships being awarded to Australian students. The importance of education is reflected as well in the overall EU-Australia relations. Specifically, in the Article 43 of the EU-Australia Framework Agreement, which was signed in 2017, is dedicated to the area of education and acknowledges the mutual beneficial goal between them to strengthen, in a structural manner, cooperation in the specific field. Beyond the statistics and the achieved progress to date, I would like to conclude by acknowledging the role of the European communities in Australia, as they can serve as a link and the basis to expand cooperation in the field of education, research, etc. I often use as an example our Cypriot community here in Adelaide. As it is the case of other EU member state communities, thousands of Cypriots have made the capital of South Australia their home. Cypriots came here in waves, starting in the 20s, then 50s, and finally in the 70s, in the aftermath of the Turkish invasion. If you visit Welland, you will witness firsthand what our community has achieved. And their achievements or goals are not only focused on serving the Cypriot culture, but mainly on serving their home, South Australia. Some of them are now leading figures in their fields, and a significant number of them are leading their teams in research institutions and local universities. This is why, during the first year of EU-Australia Leadership Forum that took place in Sydney in 2017, Cyprus chose to nominate as a representative Professor Andreas Evdokiou, an Adelaide University researcher whose work is looking at how cancer cells harness the body's natural process of bone regeneration. Despite his busy and successful research, Andreas is at the same time the president of our community here in South Australia. Andreas's and many other examples is solid proof that we have a very rich and solid ground to strengthen our relations in the years to come. Mutual recognition of higher educational diplomas, online joint master degrees are just some of the potential areas we will need to discuss. Thank you very much for your attention.
announcement. Okay, so we're going to move straight to the Q&A part of this session. Thank you very much for these overviews this evening. Distinguished ambassadors this evening have made some very important points, and perhaps we've lost slight track of our 5 minutes per segment along the way, our schedule. I threw that out the window a while ago, so we're going to move on to the Q&A. We're going to have microphones going around to the audience if you've got a question and a comment, so please start to get ready for that now. Signal to me very clearly so that we can try and get to you. But what I would like to do is to start. I know tonight's about the EU-Australia and that we're not talking about Brexit, but with the best of British happening at the festival down the road, I think we need to at least try and have one question about Brexit, if I may, although it's actually a broader question than just Brexit. It seems to me that against pretty tough competition, Brexit Britain continues to outstrip all rivals at the moment in political turbulence. And obviously with the May government caught between a rock and a hard place, between a hard Brexit, that is, crashing out without a deal on the one hand, and this possibility now of an extension to Article 50 on the other hand, misinformation rules. What I mean by misinformation rules is a recent poll out of the UK indicates that over 25% of Britons believe that no deal actually means no Brexit at all. That made me wonder when I saw that poll, and this is a question I'm actually going to direct to the EU ambassador initially, but it's open to all of you, and indeed to distinguished colleagues here at the front. I'm just wondering how much is opportunistic misinformation, what some people call fake news, is actually to blame for the mess that we currently seem to be facing here, and to what extent is this misinformation preventing a reasoned outcome from occurring?
Well, I mean, this is a tough question, and
we start easy and work up.
That's right. Now, difficult to say, but from a European point of view, we regretted that decision that was taken in the referendum, but we obviously respect it. We've been able to negotiate an agreement that we believe is the best possible under the circumstances, and the British government believed the same. It is as we see it, the ball is now firmly in the UK court. They will have to make a decision whether they support their own government in the deal that has been negotiated. And we hope very much that we'll have an orderly Brexit, because we all know the consequences of a non-orderly Brexit will not only be economically, but I think they will also create a rift between the EU and the UK for quite a while, and in dimensions that were much larger than just the economic one.
Michael, if Prime Minister May's Brexit deal is presented or is going to be presented to the UK Parliament, if that's not passed and an extension under Article 50 is sought, I mean, how far can the can actually be kicked down the road? I mean, there's already speculation about whether this would be 3 months in the lead up to the European elections, some speculation that it may be 21 months. And in any event, what would that actually solve? I mean, surely there's a point of decision that needs to happen.
Well, our position on this has been relatively straightforward. First of all, it is for the UK to request a prolongation of Article 50 procedures. It is then for EU member states to decide whether we accept that. We have made clear that we would like to see a justification why this extension has to happen, and what sort of the end and objective of that would be. Under these circumstances, we would then agree to an extension. I think there is largely a willingness in Europe to give a helping hand to our UK friends in finding and overcoming that stalemate that we've seen at this point in time. But as I say, it's not a carte blanche. It will have to come with a certain justification. And again, also on this issue, this is not our decision. It is a request that has to come from London.
Okay, I want to open this up now to questions, comments, remarks. As I say, we've got microphones roaming, so does anyone want to start me off? Yes, gentleman right there. Thanks, Ross.
I'd like to ask a question about European culture. As an Australian who's travelled and worked in Europe a bit, it seems and I've enjoyed the cultural diversity of a number of countries in Europe. But you talked about a common culture. What are the characteristics of the common culture, and how is that changing with the increased movement of people, particularly students moving around and people developing cultural attributes from many countries?
I think it's a very pertinent question. What are the tools to enhance and make everybody aware of the common culture? And one of the major tools is Erasmus, because that enables every student in Europe to study anywhere else, and that also led to a harmonization of recognition of university degrees. But there are also programs on a lower level of education where you're already a part of exchanges. So I think this is the most important tool, is that at a very early age there is exchange happening. You can move and continue with your education in other countries with other languages and which are still part of the European diversity. I think this is very important. And when you say, and in this regard, I think the working holiday agreements, which Australia has with many European countries, are very important to enable our two continents to interact more closely, so that youngsters can travel to our continents and establish a life-lasting bond with the other side, which is very important, that at a very early stage in your life you go to another sphere, and this creates lasting relationships. But if you ask me about what is the core of the European identity, which is very important for the culture, I think one should quote Pope Benedict when he addressed the German Parliament, the Deutsche Bundestag. He said, the core of the inner identity consists of 3 encounters. He called them Begegnung, encounters, which is Israel, Athens, and Rome. Israel for the faith in one God, Athens for the philosophical reason, and Rome for the legal thinking. So these 3 elements are the inner base of European identity.
Right, thank you, Bernard. We do have a question on the left, but Anna Prince, you wanted to come in on this.
The motto of the European Union is unity in diversity. So apart from shared values and constitutions and European rights, it's the asset that we are so different, and we try to preserve it by many festivals we have, increasingly so, which also creates job opportunities for art. And in the future, when we will have more time for leisure, for culture, I think this will be a fascinating Europe to visit.
Right, the gentleman here, thank you.
Thank you. I think those values are the same as Indonesia's, who have a multitude of languages and integrate value in diversity. My question, I come from Northern Ireland to Australia, and I have some understanding of the border problem that's actually a thorn in the side of the Brexit discussions. But that's not my question. I've been an auditor of Jean Monnet centres for some years, some time ago. And one of the issues that stays in my mind was the concept of Europe was always emphasized above the close bilateral relationships that the various countries had. That was the impression, because most of the centers didn't have a history in their universities of teaching about Europe. They taught about countries. And this I saw as one way to overcome that. And having heard the previous speaker, there is an issue for me as to when all of the nations in EU begin to think of themselves as European, the individuals begin to think of themselves as Europeans rather than citizens of the countries to which they were born. And how long will it take before Europe becomes an entity similar to the US or Australia or Canada, where you have a federal government that makes decisions on behalf of the whole?
Martha?
Well, it was a very good observation, but I don't think that in Europe we're going to be like the United States. First of all, we speak different languages. How many different languages we speak? So, I mean, that's one identity that we're going to keep. So, I mean, like in Cyprus, we have two official languages, the Greek and the Turkish. Here, it's Croatian, you know, every one of us, we speak different language. So, whatever happens, I think we are going to keep our identity. And that's exactly what we said, that we have unity and diversity, and we are proud of our difference. That's why we talked about the communities here, where we are proud of our communities. We are Europeans, we have the multicultural festival together, but also as communities, we have our own activities, and that's very important also.
Can I add to that? Yes. Thank you, Betty.
Yeah. What I think I want to say, address here, we are all Europeans. We all consider ourselves Europeans with our own distinct countries. I grew up in Canada, and in Canada, I was a hyphenated Canadian, as many, I think, here are hyphenated Australians. In Europe, we're not hyphenated. We are who we are, but we're part of Europe, and it's the one thing that sort of binds us, that keeps us together, while we can still keep our own identity, our culture, and celebrate it. And just to pick up on the question about students, and as a mother of a university student, a Croatian university student studying in Wales for now, one of the great things is that you know, every night when I talk to him, he says, "Oh, you know, remember my Czech friend Anna, and you know, my Cypriot friend John," and you know, they come together, they celebrate each other's sort of differences, uniqueness, but they're Europeans, and they are there studying because of one of the benefits of education, mobility that has been afforded to us, you know, in Europe as part of the European Union. I don't want to touch on now what's going to happen with Brexit and who stays where, but it has really been this opportunity for young people to go and study in the Netherlands, in France, anywhere. I mean, Denmark. It's something that just makes us that much closer, that much more European, while still preserving our own identity in Europe.
Yes, thank you. It might be good to talk to the gentleman later too, from our point of view, about the auditing of EU centres. There's another EU centre director here tonight. Unfortunately, our Q&A session's a bit truncated tonight. We're already past the 7:15 point, but I do want to try and squeeze one more question in for the gentleman there at the back. Microphone to Eric, please. Thanks, Ross.
Thank you all for your presentation. I'm wondering, just to hear some of the thoughts that you may have around how the EU deals with the topic of compromise. The word compromise seems to be almost a taboo word in some contexts, at least in terms of politics. So if you think of a context like the US, compromise doesn't seem to always occur. Whereas in the EU, it seems pretty clear that finding consensus often amongst many different countries, among member states, involves finding this type of consensus and compromise. So I'm just sort of curious, how does the EU defend this aspect of how it does its business? Thank you.
I think compromise indeed is probably at the core and has to be a core competence for everyone who works on European affairs. Because that is the way, the modus operandi that we have. Now, you will see in many countries that is something that they need already internally. We talked about nations here in Europe, but a very strong part of our European identity is also a regional one. I think many Europeans, in fact, have three identities in that regard. They come from a specific part of their own country, then they come from a country, and then they also feel European. And very often, the far away you are, the more European you feel, and the closer you come, the more sort of state or regional you feel. Now, but we obviously have to find also ways forward. The more European countries we are, the more we have to find a way of making decisions and being efficient in that decision-making process. We've grown from 6 to now 28 and 27 and probably 28 again or 29. And that means that we have to find ways where we move forward, even if not perhaps every single country agrees on every single topic. We've done this already in the economic sphere, and that works quite well. We probably will extend this over time to foreign policy decisions as well. And I think that is probably the next step that we will have to take.
Anna Prince.
Yes, it's also embedded in the decision-making process that in some areas we have to vote unanimously, in others, the power of a country is weighed, but it has been done in a way that, for example, Germany cannot dominate. It is a very nice architecture which always leads us to a compromise, also to avoid that one country can mislead the others. So we have a kind of balance of power where, let's say, deficiency of certain decision-making in certain countries is balanced. And that's why we are very stable in the long run. And as he says, where we will go ahead, if you look at Schengen, for example, lifting borders in many countries, not all of them, but the moment Frontex and institutions are built up, it will be enlarged. Or with the euro. The euro has really improved our competitive position in Europe because we don't need to ensure our currency exchange risk as we did in the past. And we were able to introduce safety valve to help the population not to lose all their money to bogus banks. So this all was happened after a crisis, and we then had a decision-making process in place which was maybe a bit elitist in Brussels, where the specialists met and found a solution which then had to be sold to the public. The more democratic it becomes, in a way, more including people, the more explaining has to be done. And sometimes, as it was mentioned earlier, it's not explained well enough. They don't understand maybe all the nitty-gritty of all decisions, and there is a certain risk in that. But we have a representative democracy in the countries, and also this is translated at the European level. So we are safe, stable, make compromises, make sure that if a country has problems, the others are helping. And I think that's the post-war architecture which we have in that field that works. And I'm convinced Europe will go strong in the future too.
So sadly, we are actually out of time at that point. I'd like to thank Bernard Zimberg, Anna Prince, Betty Pavlish, Martha Maframati, and Michael Pulch. And ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in thanking our EU guests. It was a complex undertaking, but we've managed to land the discussion at about 7:20. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming tonight. I might just mention that the next public lecture in the Ambassadorial Lecture Series run by the Centre will be delivered by Ambassador Anna Prince. So if you're good enough to come back and join us, Ambassador, we look forward to welcoming you back here on the 27th of March. So thank you very much again, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great evening, and thank you.